Hello, everybody. Welcome to Movies to Fall Asleep To. My name is Tristan Miller, and today I'm joined by filmmaker, one of my best friends and constant collaborator, Hussein Hammouda. Hi, how are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
I'm pretending like we didn't just talk for almost 45 minutes.
Well, I was gonna say that I'm gonna pretend that the podcast is starting now, and
Yes.
that yeah, we haven't been going for a while.
Yeah, we have a tendency to jabberjaw for sure, which is nice, I think.
Yeah, I mean it's rare for a phone call to go under like 2.5 hours,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I enjoy that.
Yeah, I do too. It's really hard to find people that you can actually hold a conversation with for that long. And we'll see how well this one goes. No. But you chose this very fun, interesting. It's not fun. I mean, I guess it is. It's got like fun Keanu energy, you know.
It's yeah, I mean it's kind of fun. I mean, I was trying to think of another. I'm sure there's another documentary that does it, but just like where you get that such a wide range of like
Mhm.
very established people talking about one thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um,
Yeah.
for those of you watching, you can see that I'm wearing my Super Yaki Digital Magic shirt and my documentaries cap, so I am fully in side by side mode. But the documentary is about the advent of digital film. Um, and I know you'd seen this a couple times by the time you recommended it to me, and then I finally watched it a couple of years back. How did you stumble across this one, and like what happened there?
I really have no, 'cause I rewatched it yesterday and I was trying to remember how I discovered it. Because it's not, I mean, it played at Tribeca, but it's not a
Mm,
very widely known about documentary. Um, yeah, I mean, I first watched it like back in 2012 when it first came out, maybe
oh, really?
2013. Yeah, so I mean, like when we're thinking about, I mean, that's been like a comfort movie for me for, yeah, like a decade now, even though it's kind of depressing because it's like it's about the
Sure.
death of film and like, um, yeah, no, I don't really know how I came across it, but I did, and yeah, and I've just watched it like it. Yeah, I'm kind of stumbling here.
It's all good. So you watched it when it came about a decade ago. So when it came out, so you've been aware of this for the last 10 years. And I one of the questions
Yeah,
that I did have is how do you think the predictions that they made in the documentary hold up about what happened with film in the industry in general?
I mean it's kind of spot on. Like I think a lot of the people were saying like there's that one guy near the end who says within 5 years like
Yeah.
digital will be the standard, and it's it's crazy how they predicted so much about the film industry. Like it's like such a perfect time capsule of that era. Like
Hmm.
James Cameron is talking about the rise of 3D, and you have the people saying it's a fad, and eventually it does give away. And then, now we have Avatar 2, which he said was the reason his foray into digital,
Hmm.
um, because he knew you needed digital to do Avatar. Um,
Which is when he said I was thinking about Avatar when I was shooting Titanic. I'm like, that's so crazy.
that is
You know,
crazy.
we were just belly aching before we started recording about how long movies take to make sometimes. And I'm like, okay, well, if Jim Cameron can wait 10 years to make the thing he really wants to do, I think I can just, shut up for a minute, you know?
Which, like, not just the thing he wants to do, but it's like, I would love to be wrong about this, but it
Mhm.
almost seems like the thing that he's going to devote the rest of his career to doing.
Yeah,
Like, Avatar 2, and then he's saying, like, Avatar 3 is another 5 years away, and, or,
mhm.
I don't know, 2 years, I don't know, like five
He
years between them.
he said that like Avatar was the thing he was thinking about since he's made like Aliens.
Yeah,
He's like, I want to make a place. I want to make an original thing that's mine that I get to play in and I get to go to that world whenever I want to. And so it's
right.
not surprising that he's, taking on all these sequels and stuff like that. It'd be fun to get a more quote unquote normal movie from Jim. But he's down there in that beautiful Aotearoa, New Zealand with What a Workshop, just banging these guys out.
Well, yeah, like I even watched the directors on directors of him and Greta Gerwig, and
Oh,
he's just
sure.
like in his bunker
Yeah.
underwater. Like I'm pretty sure the description says James Cameron joins us from like his underwater, not lair, but like
Yeah, he's
whatever.
he's like kind of almost a megalomaniacal person. If he like decided to be evil and not just like hyper focused on cinema, it would be over for everyone. Step aside, Elon Musk. Here comes Jim Cameron.
Right, right. Yeah, like I mean, him, David Fincher, David Lynch, like the three of them when they were talking in the documentary, I was like, it's so good that the three of you are devoted to film
Yeah,
because you could each be take over the world if you wanted to.
absolutely. In very different ways, because I feel like David would definitely be like kind of hypnotize people and become a cult leader. And then I think Jim Cameron would definitely be like an enterprise, like a Lex Luthor type of like, I'm going to buy up all this land and control people. And then I think David Fincher would have came the killer, you know.
Yeah, David Fincher, I mean, it's so funny anytime he comes up in the documentary because not that he sucks the air out of the room, but he just like comes in with something. He just always comes in with something where he's like hypercritical of film. Like when he's
Mhm.
talking about watching the dailies and
Yeah.
he's like, you just see things you don't expect. And I could just
Yeah.
digital is the perfect format for him. And then also like
Hmm.
it's also really interesting. Like when I first saw it, digital was still on the rise,
Yeah.
and it's like I think they kind of say in the documentary that film will become the exception, and now it's like
Yeah.
if something is shot in film, it's a moment.
Hmm.
And like even I listened to Bradley Cooper talking about filming Maestro,
Hmm.
and he's saying like it took them, I don't know, like 6 months into the editing process to decide to remove the film noise from like the onset sound. And he's like, I just love hearing it go. And like, but it's like, that's so crazy to me because he started off on film.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, it's just like, it's crazy how film is now like this spectacle when
Yeah.
so many people had their roots were in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because George Lucas is all over this thing. My
Right.
man George, this is the angriest I've ever seen this guy be. He is
Yeah.
so pissed off and it's so funny. And he's
It's
just like,
also crazy, like he'll come in and just like talk about something that he sold to someone.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
like,
yeah. It's like I made the first
"Yeah,
Pixar
Avid,
computer.
we sold it. Pixar, we sold it.
Yeah,
Star
it's
Wars,
like we
we
made
sold it
Editoroid and then
right
we
after."
sold it to Avid, and it's become the gold standard since you wouldn't have iMovie without it.
Right.
That kind
Then
of
like
thing.
all of the Star Wars behind. I just love this
Yeah.
wall of Star Wars. It's like, um, yeah. And then it's also, I mean, there's also like sad moments, like when they say in the documentary, like George Lucas will never film something on film again. Like he's only doing
Hmm.
digital. But it's also sad because it's like, well, he hasn't made anything in those 10 years. Like I would just
He
like James
hasn't,
Cameron, I would love to see George Lucas go back to something, but also
for
when you
sure.
have the Star Wars money.
It's also like, I mean, the thing I was also kind of getting at with bringing him up, it's interesting because he's all over this. And then the minute Lucasfilm got sold to Disney, JJ made a big stink. JJ Abrams made a big stink about shooting Force Awakens on film. He's like,
Right.
we're going back to that classic Hollywood look. We're not going to shoot it digitally. And they did that for the trilogy. And I think also for Rogue One and Solo. Solo might have been shot on digital. I'm not sure.
Solo, yeah, Solo was digital. Solo was Bradford Young. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's his name. He's in the documentary,
Oh, is
which is
he?
interesting because I looked him up after he shot Arrival. He shot like a bunch of great movies in a very short stint, and
Mm-hmm.
he hasn't worked since Solo. It looks like. I'm like,
That
what?
sucks.
He lives in Maryland. I'm like, good
Uh,
for you.
you
I mean,
know,
again, if you have that Star Wars money,
you
you
got
could
that
just
Star Wars money. I fear though for that is like Solo is of course so widely critically panned, and specifically the look of it was very much everyone was like, I can't see anything in this movie.
yeah.
But so I hope his career, like I hope he gets to work when he wants to work, is what I'll say. Um,
It looks like he has something in the works, but
good.
I mean, before he was just pumping out like I think
Mhm.
the first three movies he did all went to Sundance or something.
That's
I mean,
incredible.
I just
Yeah.
looked it up very quickly. I'm like, oh, good for you.
I I gotta say, I love seeing the credits that they choose to give these directors and cinematographers.
Yes,
Because
yes.
seeing like George Lucas, it says Star Wars 1 through 4, THX, and then like not Howard the Duck, but something else, and then like I can't remember, there was some other,
There was
because they,
someone who got wild credits, and
yeah,
I was like, that is fascinating. Like I think it was someone who was super accomplished, but they gave him like I don't know, like Clash of the Titans, and I don't.
yeah.
There was someone, and yeah, it's
They seem to put like the really well-known thing in the middle, which is nice of them because then you go,
yeah,
oh, they did that. Like it's kind of a
yeah.
nice little ooh fun to kind of give context to these people.
I mean, and then also talking about how it's like a time capsule, and then you have Greta
I
Gerwig
was
in
gonna
there
say, and she's
as an
like actor.
actress.
Yeah.
But then
What?
you see how she's so riled up about film. Like you see how
Mm-hmm.
she's upset about how people are watching movies. And
Mm-hmm.
then now with the context of what she's done since then, it's like it makes sense that she would go on because you see the passion in the
Mm-hmm.
people who like,
She's Yeah, and you see that, and she says something at the end of the documentary where she's like, "Yeah, no, people have the means of production." And I was like, "Okay, I see you, fucking,
yeah, yeah,
Karl Marx over here."
yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
um
she and like Lena Dunham are like two people that are like so of that era, and so like, oh, it makes sense that they would be in this doc, and it makes sense that they would like be like, no, we love digital film because it allows us to do what we want to do. And we wouldn't be getting the opportunities we have now with traditional film.
right. Well, yeah, that's something. I mean, that's something a lot of the times I put it on, it's very comforting.
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't know, by the time I get to the end of it, it kind of fills me with existential dread about I mean, it is
So
kind
you,
of like gatekeepy. Like there are
oh,
some
mm-hmm,
people who are like, the there's more noise, like
mm-hmm,
but then the irony is that the people in it who are saying there's more noise have made I don't like the Meg.
sure, sure,
Like, like those types of movies. I don't know if maybe
sure.
that should be included. I don't want to shit because I know, I mean, filmmaking it's so hard. So
And it's also
it's
like sometimes you just need a gig. Sometimes your health insurance is up and you have to pay your union dues. And we can all
yeah,
respect that for sure.
yeah,
But yeah, some people like, I mean, I don't want to say they're like, should like watch their mouth or whatever, but it is also like, I mean, what I think the positive way of looking at the thing you said, and by the way, I don't edit this. I'm sorry to say.
oh, you don't? Okay,
Yeah, okay,
well,
but it's fine.
I
Like
like the Meg. I mean, I enjoyed
it,
it, but it's just like
it's like
the
a B
thing about the
movie.
documentary. Yeah, it's like a B movie, but it's like I don't know. Like I think it's important that if someone decides to pick up a camera and
Hmm.
try to make something, like there's a passion behind it.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's necessarily anyone's place to say that someone should or shouldn't try to be a filmmaker, like
Hmm.
go out and make something
Yeah.
because you don't really do it on a whim. Like
Yeah.
if
We were,
you do it small scale, but like both features we've done together, it's been
mhm.
like we're really putting our everything into it.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about this before. It's like if it's not fun, and it's not fulfilling, why are you doing it? It's so hard to do. Why would you do it? But I think perhaps a kinder version of the thing you said is like what the documentary does well is it gets a huge swath of different kinds of cinematographers and actors and directors. Like Keanu Reeves is the person interviewing it, which is number one, fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it's also fast. Yeah, it's like it looks like it's over many years because he has
Mm-hmm.
the like
Different looks.
Sam Ronin look. But then yeah, he has like the short hair, and I think it was
Mm-hmm.
over. It's also interesting, like Christopher Nolan is in his trailer. I'm pretty sure for The Dark Knight Rises.
Mm-hmm.
The time, if that's the right time frame, I'm guessing like
Yeah.
2011.
Yeah.
So it's also just funny, like Keanu Reeves being like, "Hey, can I come down to your trailer on your
It's like
lunch
shoot.
break and film this documentary about the death of film?"
Yeah. It's interesting. The really cool, like he gets like a lot of quote unquote A-list directors. And then also like what's sad what's such a sadness that David isn't in it more, honestly.
Yeah,
But he gets like he's like Scorsese's in it, Fincher's in it, but like
Danny
strangely
Boyle,
Danny
and
Boyle,
and
George
like
Lucas.
it's also funny because that's something else I really love about the movie is I feel like it perfectly captures each director.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
David Lynch is in like the most David Lynch setting.
That's his
Danny
screening room.
Boyle is in like that dark, I don't know,
Yeah.
like corner of the stage with like the metal behind him, and
Mm-hmm.
it just, I don't
And then
know,
Scorsese's is in a movie
in the
theater.
theater.
Yeah.
And then James Cameron is also in a movie theater, but with like a
Mhm.
giant, like right in front of the screen, and like it's yeah, and then
It's
Fincher is like, I don't know, there's like,
he looks like in some place that they're just like a screening room.
yeah, yeah, with like the coffee on the side. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is how.
He I, I think the most interesting absent person is Spielberg.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that he's just not in this documentary. And I wonder if I'm assuming they reached out and I wonder why he said no, thank you.
Yeah. No, I thought that, I mean, I think the first time I watched it, I was expecting Spielberg to
Hmm.
show up. Um,
Has he shot anything on digital? Is he still he Ready Player One had to be digital.
yeah, I feel
So
like
he's defo done it. I think the
yeah,
post too, probably. I can't imagine.
I feel like the post might have been filmed.
Oh yeah. A film I have not seen.
You haven't seen the
No,
post?
not yet. I will maybe eventually one day.
I think I
We'll
saw
see.
it, yeah, Christmas
Hmm.
Eve
It was
2017,
so weird having
whenever it
two
came out.
Spielberg films in the theater at the same time when Ready Player One and The Post were like back to back. Anyway,
Yeah.
you said something earlier that I want to return to is that the latter half of it kind of makes you anxious. So this for you is truly a movie to fall asleep to. So there's like a minute mark where you're like, I need to be asleep by this time. Otherwise, it will keep me up.
Well, I mean, something with me is when I get anxious or overwhelmed by
Mhm.
work, I get sleepy.
Yes,
I
I do know
get
this about you.
tired.
You power down. It's very
I
interesting.
power down,
You're like in battery
and
saving mode.
no, I mean, I don't think it's, I think it's, I mean, a lot of the times, I don't know, like I watched this definitely before we did Us and Ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that was one time where I fell asleep to it, and part of it was because we're like trying to cast Summer, and there was
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
week before shooting. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna
yeah.
fall asleep. This is overwhelming. No, I mean, I I don't know. I've fallen asleep to a lot. Like we were talking about Blade Runner also. Like Blade Runner has
Mm,
just like such a soothing atmosphere, like the saxophone
yeah.
score and the rain and all
Mm-hmm.
the atmosphere. It's like it's a very comforting movie, but I don't know, side by side, I think yeah, I've
Hmm.
definitely fallen asleep to it because I mean documentaries I think are just go into your documentaries hat. I think are just like inherently comforting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I agree, and I think whenever I'm really soothed by a documentary, I will say, I don't think this is a great movie to fall asleep to, in as much as I think I need to see it more for it to be good. Because I put this on last night to see if I could fall asleep to it, and it was too interesting for me.
Yeah.
I was like, what does this guy have to say? But I will say, when I was lying there with my eyes closed, and John Knowles' voice came up, who's like the ILM supervisor for episodes 1 through 3 of Star Wars, and I'm like, ah, yes, my buddy John. And like Dennis Muren starts talking. And I'm like, oh, yes, this is very comforting to me
Yeah.
because I've heard these guys' voices so much because I watched too many DVD documentaries. And I feel like this is a very good, I think, film documentary. And I think one of the shames of everything being put to streaming is that we're not getting a lot of behind the scenes stuff
Yeah.
anymore. And I feel like that might be one of the reasons. I assume you watched a bunch of documentaries on DVD growing up, yeah?
Not as many
Really?
as not as many as recently. I mean, I feel like
Mm.
we're really, and that's something I get annoyed about. Like that is something actually when I was watching this last night, I thought it's so interesting how like yeah, that was the next 10 years was like the death of film, the rise of digital, but also part of that is the rise of streaming, which
Yeah.
at no point in this documentary did I mean, like they kind of talk about watching a movie on Netflix.
Hmm.
uh, but that is, I mean, that's really interesting. Like it's kind of like it's constantly evolving and you kind of see that happening in the documentary. Like you see the evolution of digital and the rise of it, the fall of 3D, and then I kind of feel like Kodak just put out a Super 8 camera that's like $6,000 or something insane. But it's kind of like vinyl, how vinyl like it
Yeah.
took a dip for the convenience of digital, and then people are like, wait, we like the cracks and the
Hmm.
imperfections of the vinyl, and so we'll see. I do think we'll see an upswing in film again.
I think so too. I know a lot of people, at least in terms of photography, have been started working with practical film again. And I do think it's like I think the only thing that's really keeping it for having that similar rise with vinyl as well is one of the reasons vinyl took off again is because it was so cheap to buy records. Whereas I don't think it'll ever be really cheap to buy film again.
Right.
For
But it's also
movie,
different because it's like you're not just buying one roll of film.
yeah,
You're buying like
miles of it.
yeah, like I don't know, like we had 16 hours of footage. Break that
Mhm.
down by like 10 rolls or
Yeah.
10 minutes per roll, and it's like it's a
Ugh,
lot of that's a lot of
that
film.
is. It's a lot
That's a
of
lot of
footage,
film.
if you will.
Yeah.
Um, that was something I also wanted to talk to you about because you and I've never, no, that's not true. I've been on one project that shot on film. But other than that, it's all been digital. Have you ever worked with film before? Would you want to?
I would love to. I mean, um yeah, I don't to make a feature on film, like I that's like a whole other like was it Don't Look Up was on film, and it's just
Hmm.
like I saw the canisters. I'm like, oh, okay, this
Yeah.
is what you need to do this.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
we can't really like our tiny budget would have all gone to like 3 rolls of film and no lake house. So
Yes. That was I worked on a student project and they were like, we can't pay you because we had to buy all this film. I'm so
yeah,
sorry. And I'm like, that's fine. It's a short, it's a student project. It turned out really well. It looks great. And you can tell it's shot on film, quite frankly.
yeah,
But it also took forever for them to edit it because they like didn't have the resources. Whereas like I've shot student films that were available, like they're shot on a Friday and then they send it to you on Monday.
Right, right,
That the appeal of digital, but like it was also crazy because that's the only time as an actor I've ever had like we had to go, okay, cut. We need to change the film over. And we're not cutting for because we want to. We're cutting because we have to. And then it was also that thing of like at one point the director took me aside and is like, hey, so listen, we need you to get this in like 2 takes because we don't have that much film
right,
left in this role and we need to save
right,
that other. It's like, okay, no pressure, I guess.
right. Well, I mean, that's what was it Richard Linklater who
Yeah.
said he was like, it's a sprint, it's not a marathon, and
Hmm.
like, um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was in this documentary, but where they're saying like you could hear the money going,
Yes,
like
that is.
hear the time being wasted, and it's like
Hmm.
we really need to capitalize on
Yeah,
this. Um,
absolutely.
I
Whereas
mean,
like
something else from like an editing perspective, I was like, I would love to work on film, but like that just seems
cut,
so daunting to
paste.
me. Like I like having the hard drive and just being like, all right.
Yeah, for sure.
But then on the flip side, when they're like, oh, well, you also can't lose the footage, because I'm sure everyone has been there at some point where it's like, oh, I lost this. Like, I mean, we were talking about when we shot Dave, and it's like lost a couple frames of the movie because the black magic got too cold or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, you
Hmm.
maybe don't necessarily get that with film. Um,
But you
I
do
mean,
get
you get like the hairs and the, being
degradation and
exposed
the
to sun and
if you don't store it in a cave in Tunisia or somewhere, it starts to dry up or whatever.
right.
That's the thing as well. I think it's very funny because there's a couple of really great contrasting moments in this documentary. It's edited really well because like Scorsese is like, well, of course the most you know survivable format is, of course, celluloid. And then it cuts to Jim Cameron going, so when we had a Titanic, it was in theater so long that literally the prints were falling apart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay. So the
What's
truth
also
is
really
like,
interesting, because I don't know if Marty, I don't think he's shot on film since then,
oh, yeah, that's interesting.
right? Because I think everything
Mm.
he's done since then has been digital.
I
Um,
couldn't tell you age. I can't lie to you.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know either. I'm just assuming, but
It's it's also
it
funny
is interesting. Yeah,
when he starts talking about 3D and you're like, why does he care about 3D? And you're like, oh right, he made Hugo.
Hugo. Yeah.
Tell you that was the second Scorsese film I ever saw. I'd seen Shutter Island and Hugo, and that's it for years.
That's funny.
Yeah, and everyone was like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, I don't know, man.
Hugo's good. I mean,
I liked it a
it is
lot.
kind of something like, I was thinking back to his filmography. I was like, there's a gaping hole in there. Like, why didn't he make a movie in that time? And then I was like, oh yeah, it was Hugo. It
Hmm.
was Hugo that he did between Shutter Island and what, Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I had something to
No, I'm
say.
sorry.
Oh, it's also really interesting, like when James Cameron is talking about the two camera. I mean, it's not really, I don't know. When he's talking about the two cameras that need to operate like Siamese twins and they're
Hmm.
right next to each other. And then I just thought back to Tommy Wiseau shooting The Room like that with like the digital camera and the film camera right next to each other. It's
Just
like,
in case.
is there a cut of The Room in 3D out there? Like, could Tommy Wiseau go back and try to put that out? Because in a way, James Cameron
Is the Tommy
stole that
Wiseau?
idea.
James,
Tommy
you owe me
Wiseau
money.
ghost directed. Yeah, he ghost directed Avatar.
I see you. That's very funny. I haven't thought about Tommy Wiseau in a while. Thank you for that.
I think he has a new movie coming out about like a killer sharks, or I don't know,
Well,
something. I saw the
God bless
trailer.
him. He's made the world work for him.
He has
It's really
um
taking you out of the chin. But
But
yeah,
like
there.
going back to like the people at the end, I mean, even Tommy Wiseau, you know, he went out and he tried to make something, and
Mhm.
that's the one thing where it's like the ending, it does kind of, yeah, just the gatekeeping. I don't like that.
Yeah, there's several times people are like, you need people who understand this better. And I'm like, on the one hand, yeah, I can understand what you mean of like, there's that quality there that they're worried about dipping. On the other hand, it kind of has. They were kind of right. Whereas like we're
Yeah,
getting so many movies, so many shows that it's really hard to sort through now.
yeah,
And it's sometimes really hard to find something that really fits, not necessarily like quote unquote quality or whatever, but fits your temperament and fits what you want to see. You know, we're talking about streaming as well. As like, I mean, my most favorite game is to go on a Netflix and add things to my list that I'm never going to watch.
right,
You know, it's like liking something. You know, it
right,
feels the same. And so it's one of those things of like, yeah, on the one hand, they're right that like there's too much stuff, but on the other hand, now we have all these different voices and people making films that normally would not have it at all. Like we were saying before, Greta Gerwig wouldn't have probably been able to do what she's doing. And, you know, neither would you or I with the stuff we're doing. Like, I've never once considered going and buying film. That sounds like a crazy person's like
right.
thing to do, you know, unless you have like a boatload of money or whatever. And like, I have a little DSLR and I can shoot sketches or like a little short and like it looks okay for like website content or whatever, but it's like I know where it's at. But also, what's so interesting is when Keanu asks that really angry British guy whose name I can't remember, he's a cinematographer. They goes,
Oh yeah, yeah,
he's like,
yeah,
what about the DSLRs? And he's like, they suck. They're
yeah.
terrible. I hate them. And I'm like, well, I have one and it looks pretty good now. The technology has definitely jumped so much forward.
Well, yeah, I mean the creator was basically shot on, I mean, and I think DSLRs then are very like my first short film was stop motion animation that I did on a DSLR.
Crazy
Um
that that's how you started. I love that, by the way.
it is, I mean, it's like it was side by side. I do think it was side by side. Like
Mm,
after watching that, I mean, I graduated in 2014. So I'd definitely at least seen side by side twice by then.
mm,
And it was just kind of like, you know what, they're saying you shouldn't do it on a DSLR, but I don't know, why not try? Why not? I mean, so many of the short films that we shot in New York were on a DSLR, and it's
yeah.
like it's you learn on it. So I don't think, like, I would never dismiss, I don't know, like even TikTok, like people making TikToks, it's like you're still learning how to cut things together, storytelling, like kind of like what we were talking about, like the cut from Marty to James Cameron. And it's like it's funny storytelling, like it's
Yeah.
still, but it's also interesting because I don't think that they would have predicted. Part of this is obviously like sped up by the pandemic and like, you know, the in-home theater
Hmm.
streaming releases. But I also don't think that they would have necessarily predicted like there was straight to DVD movies,
Hmm.
and then there were like your theatrical blockbuster movies. And I don't
Hmm.
think they necessarily would have foreseen that they would get lumped in together. So that like, you know, you had The Killer come out a month ago, but then you also had like 10 other like
Yeah.
B movies released to Netflix. So and that's what I was saying. Like, it's really interesting. Like, if they did another
Hmm.
documentary like that right now, where would it be in 10 years?
Yeah. I would love a follow up to this. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's too late in as much as they can't do like a 10th anniversary or whatever. But did you say the thing you were going to say when you were saying I did stop motion? Just want to make sure you got back to that.
What was I saying? I don't
Hmm.
know. I
All right.
forgot.
Well, good.
um, well, yeah, I mean, it's something where you just learn. Like, I learned how to edit from doing that short film. I learned how to score. I learned how to, you know, I mean, it's stop motion, but you still learn how to frame things, like
Hmm.
the power of a close up, like how to create,
Mhm.
what to include in the wide, and you still learn things. So I don't know. I Those last 10 minutes make me a little annoyed every time where it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little, dare I say, snobbish. I'll say this as well. I remember that first short we did, um,
Pogo Cop?
and yeah, Pogo Cop, and you were like so worked up, and you were like really nervous about the whole thing, and I was like, why? And you're like, I've never had to direct actors before. The first film I made was with stop motion. And I was like, that's a crazy place to start, but good up for you. Um, that was something as well of like, I was thinking in terms of, I do like how they did bring in actors to talk about it because, obviously that's my main point of view about filmmaking is that's, where I started. But it is one of those things of like, have never considered, like I was saying before, having to stop every 10 minutes. And so I had never really thought about that. And then hearing John Malkovich talk about it,
Oh yeah, John Malkovich.
he's
He's
like,
like, can
it's a
we
moment to,
go now? Can we
yeah.
go?
Yeah. And I'm like, I never would have considered that because I've always been like, okay, we do, sometimes like when we we're shooting Us and Ourselves, God bless Patrick, he was given like 3 pages of dialogue all in one setup. And it's like, yeah, this is just, and he did an admirable job with it. And it's just like, because that's what digital means. You can just like go for that amount and not have to worry about it, which is great. But also, like, you have to keep everything,
Yeah,
which also makes sense why sides were so important. Where you're like, oh, I'm just memorizing a page of dialogue because that's all we
right,
literally can do,
right, right.
But another director whose absence I felt in this was Peter Jackson. And I assume it's because he was shooting The Hobbit at the time.
Yeah,
But it's like
yeah.
weird not to see PJ there. And it's also weird to,
Because he was doing, I mean, he did that transition. Like he was
yeah.
someone else who, I mean, him and Ang Lee, I would have loved to hear their thoughts because they
Mm-hmm.
both really pushed, I mean, kind of like James Cameron, but they both did the super high frame rate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been interesting to hear their thoughts on digital.
For sure.
They
Specific,
experimented. Yeah.
yeah, I think specifically, yeah, I would agree the frame rate thing. I also think with what's crazy, sorry to interrupt, but it's also weird to think about is that all of Lord of the Rings was shot on film. And that has so many vis effect shots. And Weta is having to like, layer on top. It's so crazy to think about all those miniatures and stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about, they showed 2001: A Space Odyssey in there. It's just crazy to think that film really was the standard for, even going back to Blade Runner, like they found a way to use miniatures and I know they kind of did that for 2049, but it's interesting to think about how like now we could do stuff like that. Like, we
Yeah.
had green screen and dominoes. It's like,
Yeah.
could we have done that if we shot it on film by ourselves and we're like editing it? And I don't know.
Yeah. It is this like beautiful thing. I love the thing that David Lynch says, where he's like, everyone has a pencil and a piece of paper, but how many good stories are going to be written by that? And I think that's going to happen. But what's really, I think, lovely about that is he's also like, I'm never going to go back to film, because it
Right.
just is. And so he's like, I think there's two sides of it. And it's like, literally, it's like side by side, and it's like really, really lovely. How do you,
Well, he also embraced like Inland Empire. He really
yeah.
embraced um like that, and then Collateral is something I think of a lot when I think about
Hmm.
that documentary.
Hmm.
Um yeah, it's interesting. And then Danny Boyle also, I
Oh
mean,
yeah, where he's like with a GoPro or whatever. Yeah.
with like the what like six different cameras at the vantage points.
Mhm.
I mean, I think about that when we would go out in New York. I mean, I think that's what inspired me to be like, we could do Blade Jogger in the streets of New York. Let's just have
Yeah.
like two different cameras and just like
Yeah.
twice as much out of it.
Yeah. I remember even like just I was making this terrible web series. It wasn't terrible. It was pretty fun. It was silly though. It was not serious, this web series for in school. And I remember I was working with a now defunct friend of mine on it, and we were just shooting it, and like he was like, "Well, how will we show that this goes to that?" I'm like, "Well, we'll cut, and then the
Right.
next shot is over here, and you'll see it happen, and the audience will go, oh, we're over here now." And he just like couldn't wrap his head around it. And we were like, I was like moving the camera in a way that like was reminiscent of like Evil Dead and that sort of thing. And like it was all like handheld, more or less. And it was one of those things of like, even though such rudimentary things were just so freeing, and this was 2012, around the time this movie was coming out. And it's weird to think that you know, there's a generation of filmmakers around our age and all obviously younger that were like, we always had access to this. We
Yeah.
never didn't. And it's like, you really, like you were saying, like get to learn kind of on the job rather than you go, well, this looks like shit. Why?
Right.
And then you can extrapolate from there. Oh, it's because I didn't do this or that, or it's out of focus or whatever. That's another thing of like, oh, God, I can't imagine going to the rushes the next day and like seeing something that's just like out of focus and you have to shoot it again.
Right. Right. Which, yeah, which is what David Fincher
Yeah.
talks about, which is, it's just funny that out of everyone who spoke about it, it was David Fincher. Like I could imagine he got
Oh, yeah.
take take whatever, right? And he's like, all right, we got it. And then he goes back and sees it's totally out of focus. But
That's so funny.
I mean, yeah, it's, and we even do that. I mean, honestly, with like with us and ourselves, I mean, we had playback, but I mean, with like the types of movies we make, you know, a lot of the times it's like a tiny little monitor that we have, and
Mm-hmm.
we can't really see, like with Dominoes when we were shooting the field and
Oh,
the
yeah.
I was like, all right, this all looks great. And then I get home and I put it on like my computer, which like obviously isn't like what they're doing Avatar on, but it's like a bigger
Yeah.
monitor. And then I'm just like, oh, there's dust spots everywhere. Just like you don't
Yeah.
focus on that tiny little
Mm-hmm.
um screen. So it's, I mean, that's just part of filmmaking, is just like you get back and you're like, why is that person in the background watching us
Mm-hmm.
while we're filming?
But luckily now we've gotten to a point where you can like circle that person and then just delete them from exist.
Right.
You can snap them out of existence. They get blipped.
Right. Well, I mean, that happened a lot in Blade Jogger, and then I was like, I'm just gonna incorporate it, and I'm just gonna have like
Mm-hmm.
it kind of plays into Patrick being this crazy
Yeah,
cop
paranoid.
that's high on drugs, and
Sure.
people like he thinks he's a Blade Runner, but he's
Yeah.
an idiot.
He's like, yeah, he's a line runner, if anything.
Yeah.
But I'll say this as well. There's a moment where, and I really I can't remember what director was talking about this, but I really felt for them because like they're talking about actors will get insistent to watch their playback now. And it's just like, no, get them away from Video Village, get them away from the monitor. They don't need to see it. Shush. And I feel very strongly about that, with some exception. I feel like, generally speaking, as an actor, I'm like, I don't even want to think about it. It's not my job.
Right.
But on the other hand, as someone who has directed and can direct, I'm like, okay, well, if you tell me, if you need something really specific, you're going to be like, come over. I need you to be here in the frame or whatever. But how do you feel about that?
We've we've talked.
That's fair enough.
We've talked about where it's like it, I mean, they're kind of right about that in the documentary, where a lot of the time it gets in the way of, it's kind of like, I mean, and that's the film thing about film, is you're just putting your trust, like everyone is putting their trust in each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I think sometimes like I think some people can look at the footage and be like, okay, I'll try this differently. But I
Hmm.
do think there is like a lot of like, can you film me
Oh
this
yeah.
way? Like, can
Yes.
you like,
The light. He said I can't remember who it was, but he's like, I'm convinced everyone is just looking at their hair.
yeah, I think it was that cranky DP.
Yeah. Well, which
And
one? There's like five of them in
he
this thing.
yeah, I mean, he is right. Like that was
Hmm.
I've run into that where it's like, you know,
Yeah. And
just becomes like a request about
whereas I'll
it's not
say,
necessarily best for the scene. Like that's the thing is like
mm-mm.
the director, the DP, like they have the like how it's gonna cut in mind, and sometimes I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
People, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's like because you're not seeing the whole picture, you know. I will say though, this I wish I'd seen playback on the bet because that first scene, oh, my hair does look crazy.
yeah. Well, I mean that's different also because you are directing it, so
Yeah,
that's something where. But yeah,
yeah.
I get
It,
that.
it
I
was one of
mean,
those things as well, though. Like with that, I was like, we just didn't have time for me to like go back to the monitor every single take because I was like, I was also
yeah,
like, I trust Jake, who is the DP. You know,
right,
much like they're talking about the relationship between a director and a DP in this. I'm like, he knows how to frame a shot. I hired him. I've seen his work. We're good.
right.
But it was like no one, as an actor, I was like, no one could have told me I have Tom Hanks hair in this scene. Come on, man. It's like everywhere. I look like Angels and Demon Tom Hanks, and I'm like, you couldn't have just been like, get some moose.
Right. But then going back to like it being a, you know, a live trust, you
Mhm.
trust your editor to not use those takes
I do, but they are all the
or
takes,
or punch
unfortunately.
in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Trying
it's
to
all good.
trying to play
I
devil's advocate.
thank you. I appreciate it. But it is just the fact that also it was like a pretty windy day and I had long hair at the time. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think that I just like that resonated with me on like three different levels when he was like, everyone's just looking at their hair. But yeah, it's really interesting seeing also this documentary is so fun because there's a couple actors in it, obviously, like we've talked about, but it's mostly other industry roles who don't necessarily have like the PR training that actors do in
Yeah.
interviews to like kind of spin things kind of positively. Like that one guy, like the angry British guy is so mean. He's like, well, it's not good enough, is it? You know, he's like very like, it's crap. It looks so bad. And then
Right.
even Keanu goes, well, you know, there's more films being made. Isn't that a good thing? He goes, no. And it's so
Yeah.
funny just to see people who are not afraid to just like say their opinion. I think that's really lovely. There's a lot of passion
But
in it.
then it's also really nice that Keanu, you know, and then
Mhm.
he's on the street with the student film people
Oh
asking him
yeah.
about because I mean that's part of it. I think if we had tried making movies like 20 years ago with the drive that we have and like because it's something that you really need to want to do to continue doing it because it is just like just such a just you just get beaten down every day by it. So it's something that you really need to push forward to do. And I feel like if it wasn't for like going back to what he says, like all of the noise around us, it would be a little bit easier to so I understand what he's saying, but it's I don't know. Don't because you're coming from a very privileged place and you've had that chance to climb the ladder and it's kind of
Mhm.
like I don't know. I don't like the gatekeeping.
I agree. I mean, I feel this way a lot about like when I was going to acting school, like people, you know, talk about like Daniel Day-Lewis and that sort of thing, and like that level of performance that you'd be like, you want to try to achieve this. And I'm like, well, he has the privilege of like working every 10 years. I don't have that. You know,
Right.
I have to figure out what works for me to just show up and be able to do.
Right.
And I feel like that's also how I kind of feel about digital film as well as like, well, that's all well and good. I would love that. Like you're saying, it's a very privileged position. And, you know, we're out here trying to make stuff that does, not only isn't like is entertaining, but also is like has artistry to it.
Right.
And we have the tools that we have, and I don't think you should begrudge it. Like it's like you see sometimes the best like play you'll see is like at an off Broadway show, and because there's a lot of heart to it and they figure out how to do it.
Right.
And then you go and you see something that, is on Broadway and it seems, soulless or whatever. And, you know, money and skill don't always necessarily indicate the quality of a piece of art.
Right. And it's like, some of the people in the documentary who um are not talking favorably about digital, they've gone on to kind of do those like
Mm-hmm.
soulless types of movies where it's just like a lot of, green screen and effects and there's value in that also. Like if that's the type of story and project that they want to tell, then
Mm-hmm.
they should be able to. But yeah, it's an interesting, I don't know.
It's what
It's
I do like about the doco is the fact that like both things are correct.
right.
And at no point do you fully feel. I think it's a very well orchestrated documentary because every time there is one opinion, there's a counterpoint. And
Right.
at no point are you feeling like you're directed in one way or the other to feel it's pretty objective, which is for a documentary specifically about film, very difficult to achieve.
It's very objective, and Keanu does a really good job at that. Like
Yeah.
you like, I mean, yesterday when I was watching it, by the end, I was like, I wonder, did they shoot this on digital or film?
The whole time I was thinking about that. To be honest, it looks like it's like on
It kind of
a
looks like it might be a mash of both.
sometimes it looks like it's a mash of both. And then sometimes it also looks like it kind of looks like 720p YouTube video or whatever. Maybe
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really interesting.
There's it's I think something else that's really interesting, like going back to what I was saying about how things are constantly evolving. Like back in 2011, 2012, when it was filmed, like yeah, DSLRs may not have been great. Um, but iPhones weren't great either. Like iPhones were terrible. And
Hmm.
then you have Steven Soderbergh in the documentary saying like, once the Red came out, I wanted to call film and say like, I found someone else,
Yeah.
and this is the future. But then
Mm.
5 years later, you have him shooting, was it Unsane on the
Yeah.
iPhone? Because like iPhones had gotten to that point. So it's also just really interesting how like it's constantly evolving and
Hmm.
um yeah, I thought that was really funny because hasn't he made two iPhone
Yeah.
movies since then?
And then you can
So
watch them
it's
on Netflix exclusively.
and now yeah, now you can watch them on Netflix. Yeah,
I
now you
think
could
it's,
watch his stuff on he did like three movies that went straight to HBO.
yeah. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a mark of a good artist is someone who's at least willing to play with a new technique, right? And push and that sort of thing. I think someone like, I obviously really love a lot of George Lucas's movies. I would say most of them, all the ones he's directed, I've enjoyed on some level. Um, but he seems more of a person who's more interested in pushing the technology at a certain point than necessarily the story he's telling. He kind
Right.
of sometimes he sees them as I think in tandem, but they're so closely linked that he's like, well, I have to push the technology to tell the story I want to tell, and they're like so linked. Whereas someone like David Fincher was like, well, I found the tool that I love to use to tell the story. It's not about the tool. Because, like, for
Right.
example, like Social Network, when I saw it in theaters, I didn't even think about whether or not I was on digital or film. I couldn't tell. Like, and admittedly, I was a teenager or whatever seeing it. And I was like, oh, this movie is here. And it's still a very, it's obviously a quality film and it has nothing to do with whether or not it was shot on digital or film. But you can tell, I don't think he would have been able to, like, even as they outline it in the documentary, where there's that scene where they're rowing and he's like, how can you make the camera lighter so I could put it
Yeah.
on this boat? I think physically would not have been able to do it. And it's so lovely to see, him be able to go, okay, this is where I'm at. This is how I can make movies, and now I'm happy to do it.
Right.
Whereas before, it kind of felt like he was like, oh, it's like, oh, I love this thing, but she drives me crazy.
Right. Well, kind of going back to what we were saying, it's still a very privileged place to be, because I think it was either him or Steven Soderbergh said, um, they've worked very hard and like made incredible things to get there. So I'm not discrediting them, but they're like, it's like Red is now a place where like the people making the product and the cameras like
Hmm.
work in conjunction to get what they want. It's like we couldn't have called Fred to be like, hey, we're making a movie. Our budget is X amount of dollars. Can you give us a camera for $1,000? They would be like, all
Yeah.
right, leap off. So I think
Yeah.
it's something where, but then it's really interesting because like you were talking about how James Cameron needs the technology to push
Hmm.
to tell the story he wants to tell, but then the story itself, like a criticism of Avatar was its Pocahontas with blue people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the flip side is like Christopher Nolan, who keeps his format constant, like he keeps film constant, but then he finds ways to push the stories he's telling. It's
Hmm.
like by keeping by just sticking to film, it's like he could focus on Tenet, Interstellar,
Hmm.
like just like becoming. It's kind of like, I mean, him and Greta Gerwig, I both heard them say that when they direct, they just have a wardrobe for the whole shoot.
Yeah.
They just have like a suit that they wear every day, or like a couple suits that they wear, so that they could focus on making decisions on set.
Hmm.
I don't know if any of that makes sense. I don't know if what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, I know it. I mean, it's the same reason Lynch wears the same outfit every day. He's like, now I don't have to think about this. I can think
Right,
about the things I want to think about.
right.
Same with what is his name? He plays Roy Kent. He's always in a black t-shirt and jeans because he's like,
Oh
someone
yeah,
told
yeah.
me I look good in it, and I
Right,
don't have to think about it again.
right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing where it's like if you keep the same tool, like I don't
Hmm.
know, we both play instruments, and it's like if you have a guitar and you have the same guitar, you can learn how to be better at it.
Hmm.
But then if you keep getting like the newest upgrade of guitar, then there's more things to learn and you could like experiment. But I don't know, it's and that's something just about the arts in general. It's just like
Hmm.
you're always trying to challenge yourself in some way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it is like, what do you want to do with your career and what do you want to do um, to make the things you want to make? And because it is like one of those things of like Cameron and Lucas before he retired clearly were like, I'm interested in pushing the technology. I'm interested in playing around with this. Like the fact that like Jim Cameron was like, oh yeah, I built a camera with these guys because he's someone that literally built a camera with these guys because he
right,
is interested in that kind of stuff. Whereas I feel like George Lucas in another lifetime would have been a Silicon Valley, like Steve Jobs type, where he's like, I'm just interested in computers.
right, right,
Whereas like that's so much their MO. And then like you get someone like Nolan who's more focused on, like you were saying, story and stuff like that. And like then you have someone in the middle like Danny Boyle, who's like clearly interested in both and is learning how to balance the two, which I think is really lovely. I don't know. And then, you obviously have the example of Nolan being the film. And then I think the opposite or the flip side of that would be Fincher, who is like, I'm only doing digital. I'm not worried about it anymore. It's not a
right,
discussion every time.
right,
Because I feel like when you are putting together a movie, you're like, okay, what are we going to shoot this on? What are the lenses? What kit rental do I need? Yada yada yada, and it's just like such a headache.
right. Yeah. Um, sorry, I was just
You're all
thinking
good.
about all of that. That's what I'm saying. Like it's a very comforting movie, but then it's also overwhelming to be like, you need so much for yeah.
I think one of the reasons it is so comforting though is it frankly, Keanu. He has such
It is,
a good
yeah.
energy about him.
Keanu and the score. I mean, I think the opening
Hmm.
score is just like it's very comforting. And that's something about documentaries where it's just um yeah. And that's something like docuseries. I enjoy docuseries, but I would rather just like a 2 hour just succinct. Like
Hmm.
I don't think everything has to be a series these days.
I agree. There's a lot of TV shows that were clearly pitched as a movie and then they chopped it up and added a little something to like, you know,
Right.
you
Right.
know. But yeah, I think so too. I think the score is really beautiful. And also I think frankly speaking, a big aesthetic reason this is good to like kind of lull yourself to sleep is the fact that no one's yelling. Like
Yeah.
sometimes, when the most loud person is George Lucas, no one's raising their voice. You
Right.
know,
Because it's still like a loud indoor voice.
yeah, he's like, listen, he like does not raise it up a certain devil. He's such a soft-spoken man. And yeah, it's like the decibel level is smooth, the vibe is good. It's like also if you're not super interested in film, I'm sure quite boring. And you can just zonk out. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that's so comforting is like I've seen it so many times that
Hmm.
like it is something I could fall asleep to because it's like, okay, I know what they're talking about. Like I kind of know the visuals. And it's just like, even if it was a podcast and you listen to it, there's so much that you could learn from the
Hmm.
information. Like everyone's talking about their techniques. Like
Hmm.
I do think Danny Boyle talking about how he made 28 Days Later is just like that was the single most encouraging thing to me when I decided I will like it kind of came at a perfect time where 2012 I was getting ready to graduate college and I was thinking about what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
Um and it was like, oh, film is something I always kind of liked, and like hearing Danny Boyle talking about how he had done 28 Days Later on just like camcorders, it's like my family has camcorders, and then eventually when they start talking about the DSLRs, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally just shoot this. Like I was working I was working this you sell people like social security insurance, or like people call you to get their socials. I don't know. It was death shot. It was like a bad death shot. It was terrible. Um, but I would get home from that at like 8 o'clock at night, and then just on my DSLR, totally because of this documentary, just talking about how like you shouldn't film something on DSLR. So I was like, oh well, I'll try it to find out for myself. And I would just you know make that short film for 2 nights, 2 hours every night, and then yeah, and then eventually I thought to send it to MFA, like film school applications, and then I decided you're already like $40,000 in debt for undergrad, so I don't know if the smartest decision is tacking on another $160,000, and then that's when I went to New York, and then a year later we were making short films, and yeah, so it's I don't
So it's
know.
all because of this movie.
I do think a big part of it is this movie.
That's so
Um,
interesting.
and then as weird as it sounds, it was also Guardians of the Galaxy just being like,
Mm-hmm.
um, because like, and that's kind of the same thing as this movie where it's like find ways to think outside the box, and James Gunn kind of he brought his own type of storytelling to that,
And
and
now he's playing for the other team. He's in
now
charge
he's
of the
playing
other
for the
team.
other, now he's in charge of the other team.
That's
He's not just
crazy to
playing
think
for them,
about.
which yeah, I mean that's what I mean. Yeah, like when Greta Gerwig is talking about film in the documentary, like she's gone on to be, I mean, she'll be twice Oscar nominated by the start of 2024. So
Yeah, and has one of the highest grossing films of the year, if definitely with the
she's gone
top
on. Yeah,
five.
yeah. I mean, the stat is she's the first woman to direct a movie that cracked $1 billion, which is like, and you see that in her in the documentary, like the
Yeah.
way she talks about film and filmmaking. It's like she has this fire,
Hmm.
which a lot of people have, like in that, I don't know, even the cranky British guy. I'm like,
Yeah. We should really look up his name. We're not doing it.
maybe we shouldn't, so that we don't
Oh,
name
so
drop.
yeah, so it's more vague. So
This
we
is
call
more
him
vague.
cranky because there's a
Because
couple.
there are a few cranky British men in
That is
there.
true. Specifically, yeah.
I mean,
Um,
it's also funny because everyone in the documentary is so riled up about their stance.
yeah.
Like Robert Rodriguez when he's talking about filming Once Upon a Time in Mexico, but then later Sin City. Like he's so riled up about digital and how that's the future.
I can't remember what question Keanu asks him. He goes, "Yeah, well, that's stupid." He is basically
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah,
it's
yeah.
so funny. It's also really fun because he goes, "Well, I heard George talk about it, and he's Obi-Wan, and I'm gonna go,
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
follow
follow." And then
Obi-Wan.
he
Yeah,
gets to shoot a Star Wars later, and like knowing that is so sweet.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, he gets to be in charge of a whole series. Whether or not you like that, someone likes that series is up to them, but it's still like really lovely narratively, you know. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a really good doc. I think if someone's interested in film at all and how it has changed over the last like 20 to 30 years, absolutely watch it because this is such a pinpoint and it's so pivotal to see how the market has changed and how production has changed. And I know as much as like I love to vetch and bellyache about the state of things, I do feel really privileged and lucky to be able to be coming, up in an environment and like currently working in an environment where as Greta said, the means of production are like readily accessible to me. Like my
Right.
DSLR is on this desk. I shoot stuff all the time. And I just feel incredibly lucky that's even possible. Because I know growing up, I was like, I don't even know if I could ever do this.
Well, yeah, and like growing up, I didn't see a lot of movies that, and I mean, we've talked about this. I still don't feel like there are movies out there that perfectly capture experiences I've had and other, but you do see that, like, we definitely, like, the rise of digital has allowed a lot of people who otherwise, it is interesting who in the documentary is saying don't do it because it kind of like is symbolic of the industry, and now you have diverse people telling their stories, and I don't know, I think it's, yeah, I feel privileged to that we get to do it, not
Mhm.
for the money that they're making in this documentary, but we're still doing it, which is, yeah.
Yeah, we're having a go. Is there anything else you want to let people know? We've talked for about an hour, which is generally how long this goes.
I don't think I just say I think it's a great movie to fall asleep to.
Mhm,
Um, it's just, I don't know about fall asleep. I think the movie I've fallen asleep to the most is Batman Begins. I was trying to think about that after
mhm.
we were talking about it. I think it's Batman Begins, but I think a big part of that was because I was like watched it through high school. And
Yeah.
again, I fall asleep when I get stressed. So I would be writing like an English paper and I would just zonk out.
That's so funny. I
I
think
think
there's
the
def
first time I saw Batman Begins, I fell asleep during it. But
You
that was,
hear
yeah.
that, Nolan?
Not in a bad, I mean, I saw it where I saw it, I think I saw it in Egypt. So it was like
Interesting.
jet lag. Yeah, which is
Okay.
like also um yeah, it's an interesting thing to see blockbusters overseas
I would imagine so, yeah.
with like the intermission, and the only time I've had an intermission here I think was Hateful Eight. It's nice.
It
It's
is.
nice.
I think so too. I understand why people don't want to do it. Americans particularly aren't big on intermissions. Like when I was in New Zealand, they do intermissions for comedy shows. because you go to the bar, you get a couple drinks, and it makes a lot of money. Whereas like in
Right.
America, I think we're rude enough to be like, oh, I'm just gonna get up in the middle of this thing. Whereas everywhere
Yeah.
else is polite enough to be like, okay, let's like give this the full attention it desires. But that's
Or
really
we'll
interesting
all talk about holding our pee for 3 hours because that's the American way. Like
because
even if
James Cameron was like, no,
yeah, you will
no,
come back and watch it a second time. And he was right. I mean, it cracked 2 billion. People
just which I think is wild. And like, I haven't seen it yet, but what's wild about it is I haven't met a single person that has seen it. And yet
yeah.
it still made that amount of money. And I'm like, there's so many people in this country.
No, yeah, like I saw it in my auditorium.
Okay.
I think it was totally empty.
Now I've met someone
It's
who's seen it.
yeah, I mean I saw it.
I
I
regret
enjoyed
not
it. I
seeing
mean,
it.
it's I mean I'm sure when 3 comes out they'll re-release
Of
2.
course, James loves to re-release a
He
very
loves
popular
to
movie.
re-release.
They re-released the first one before the second one came out.
Which is actually also really interesting because he's talking about like embracing digital. And I know something that's not, I don't know about controversial, but I think it's True Lies is getting a 4K remaster,
Mm.
and a, I think he's used AI to remove the film grain from it,
Hmm.
is what I've read. So it's
Interesting.
just so he's basically like giving it the digital look, and I don't know, I thought that's really interesting in hindsight. And then
Yeah.
I don't think he would ever do that to Titanic because I
No,
know that just got a remaster.
that got a remaster when they put it in 3D as
No,
well.
and then just got a 4K remaster, I think,
Oh, I mean, that makes
earlier
sense.
this year.
There's always a constant specifically talking about Lucas as well, of like, there's always this conversation to be had of like, when does a piece of art kind of belong to the public? When does it belong to the person that made it? What is film preservation versus what is like, extraction? But that's, I think, another hour-long conversation for us.
Yeah, I mean
You know,
we've talked about films for like 3 hours at a time, and then
yeah.
been like, all right, I'll call you. Even I mean the start of the shutdown, we started the
Oh yeah.
film club where we was just like, and I think that was the first time I recommended Side by Side to you, or maybe
I,
I'd recommended it in New York, but I said, oh, we should talk about it.
yeah. Yes,
Okay.
that was definitely the first time I watched it. Good call. And then, but I do remember, I think we were both working at Iridium when you first mentioned it. And I was like, oh
Very
yeah, that sounds interesting. And then I just like left my mind. And then you reminded me of it. And I really enjoy it. I think it's really interesting to think about in general. Um, I will also say, as we wrap things up here, tell people what you're up to, man. If
we
people
have
don't know who
to.
you are and you want to know what to do. I know you're not really on social media much anymore, but
Now
you've
I feel like
disappeared off my timeline.
I I might need to go back to social media. I don't know. We'll
Do
see.
you want me to put your email in the
Write
description?
your email.
Yeah,
Um,
your address.
I mean, we just made a movie together last year, so we're just waiting to hear what festivals it gets into, and um
Hmm.
dominoes. I mean, we're starting to talk to distributors about that, but yeah, for now it's just like a live sitting around and waiting. Hopefully in 2024, us and ourselves will be
Hmm.
playing at some festival somewhere. I
Hmm.
don't know, some rinky dink tiny basement.
The very least, we'll try and find. I reckon that you'll try and put together a screening because that'd be nice
Yeah,
to see.
yeah. No, I think we, it's, I mean, and that's something, I mean, going back to the documentary, I mean, I could talk about the documentary.
Mm.
But it is interesting, like the cranky British man saying more people are doing it. And I mean, that creates a lot of noise. Like when they said the Sundance submissions, like
Oh yeah.
went up like 100 times over 5 years, like once
Hmm.
digital came around. that's something interesting to think about. Like, like Sundance Slam Dance, a certain type of movie would come out of them in the 90s, and
Hmm.
how now it's like, I don't know, it's all very interesting. It's interesting now, like 10 years ago, I don't think, I mean, it was always like kind of like what Richard Linklater says, like, if the man would ever give me the money,
Mm,
I would go do this. And then 10 years later, the man didn't give us the money. We put the money together,
hmm,
and then we went and did something with that little money. But now
hmm.
it's interesting to now be on that side of it. And uh yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I suppose. I reckon you've probably watched it enough that every point in your career you've gotten something new out of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, even, yeah. I mean, yesterday when I was watching it, it just filled me with like existential dread, where it's
Well,
like, oh
I'm
no, am I the
sorry.
noise? Are we the noise that he's talking about?
I don't
Like
think
the bet and
so.
us and ourselves, are we the noise? I
I
don't think we're the
mean,
noise
this
though.
is this is always how people behave, though. Like they always go, well, anytime anything changes, they go, well, it's gonna lessen the thing I'm doing. And it's like, well, maybe
Right,
it's not about you, mate.
right.
Like,
Which now that might be true,
sure.
because like we were saying, like streaming, it's just like constantly things are coming and going. I think,
Yeah. And like the fact
and
that
then
we
the
will,
irony of it is like now, like, I don't know, now, like, I would love for our movie to play in a theater, but it's like that, like those people have pulled their movies from it. Like,
Mhm.
Fincher is doing stuff for Netflix, and um I mean, even what was it called? The Hitman? Like, I think the Hitman, the Glenn Powell movie that
Mm-hmm.
Richard Linklater did, like, I think that's going to Netflix. So it's now like, all right, well, if they're not playing in theaters, like, how are we going to get to theaters?
Yeah, it was. Yes. Yeah, I agree. That is like a. I mean, I think honestly, I don't want to get too far into this, conversation because
Yeah,
again, it's
now
like,
we're kind of mirroring the
oof.
documentary where we're going into the
But I'll say this,
like,
I think the answer is supporting your friend's stuff and
yeah,
seeing stuff. If you're an independent creator, going to see independent films, going to go see plays, going to, art galleries and shows and stuff, and building it out of community. And I think the good and bad thing about like the democratization of everything regarding the internet is like you get more access to it, but also at a certain point, there's again more stuff coming at it. But it is picking and choosing who you want to support and why and how you're going to support those people. And like, you and I have both done crowdfunding for shorts and for features and stuff like that. And what's always to me crazy is you always get a couple of randos that you've never met before that are just like on GoFundMe or on Seed and Spark, and they're just like there to help produce films because they love film. And if you have the funds to do it, highly recommend doing that
yeah.
because that's the
But
way
yeah,
we're going to get through this.
yeah, they're called, what are they called? Because we had I mean, even Seed and Spark, they have the, what are they called, like the patron,
Yeah, yeah.
that like,
Like,
I
isn't
think
Kamal Nanjiani there?
I think so, like, and
Yeah,
Mark Duplass, and I think
yeah.
Emily Gordon.
Hmm.
So it's, I like that side of it. Like, I think there are the two sides, like the people encouraging the next wave of, because they all kind of came up, like stand up, you very much come up through the ranks, like you have
Yeah.
to build an audience. And indie stuff, it's the same thing. And
Hmm.
then there's that middle area where we are, and then there's the people on the other side, the gatekeepers. Like,
Yeah.
so we're sandwiched between those. But yeah, I mean,
Tricky,
that's,
man.
yeah, it's, I would love for a side by side too, where it's about,
You should email
uh,
Keanu and be like, "Dear Keanu Reeves."
I think he's actually here with his band. Maybe it was yesterday, but he's on tour with his band,
That's
Dog
so
Star.
good. That's
Go
so good. He's such a
go to a
cool
show,
guy.
Keanu, side by side too.
Side by side two win. Oh, well, thank you so
Two
much for
side
doing
by
this.
side.
Side by side. side two by side. Is that
Side
it?
two by side.
Uh, four
Side
by
by side,
four,
but yeah, 4x4. I was trying to side cube,
side squared. Yeah,
side
cubes.
squared.
Yeah. Well,
Side
thanks
by
for
side.
doing this. This was a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's been fun. I'm glad to have gotten onto your
Yeah.
podcast because we've been talking about that for like so many years, and I
Yeah.
just never.
We've known each other for almost 10 years. And it's crazy that this is the first one we're doing. And
Yeah,
it's
like especially
silly.
with the pandemic in place, like where we were just, but we decided to make a movie instead. We decided
Yeah.
on a DSLR.
Yeah, on a
So
DSLR. And the thing is, that's fair. I mean, in retrospect, had I known things were going to shake out the way, hindsight of 2020 is 2020, obviously, I
yeah,
would have been like, yeah, no, H and I should have started a movie podcast and I should have just like
yeah,
pushed that because that probably where I ended up. But anyway, I'm glad we're finally doing it though. This has been a delight and look for H on an episode of Focus Testing if that's not already come out by the time this gets to your ears.
yes, I'm
Yeah.
excited to do that also. So I'm
Yeah.
either here or there or both.
Time, crazy.
Time, time.
Mm.